Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Over 80% of the processed food in the United States is genetically modified. Is it safe? And what are the advantages? We hope this episode of Real Ag will provide some information that will help you become informed. GMOs are the topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What does it mean for something to be genetically modified?
GMO is termed the acronym for genetically modified organism. Soybeans have been genetically modified to be resistant to some herbicides, and also there are some disease modifications to help the plant stay healthier. I'm not much of a geneticist, but a lot of the things they can essentially turn off or turn on genes or find genes in there that are resistant to a certain chemical or a certain disease to help build a resistance in that, and through crossbreeding or crossing varieties and growing that, they can develop one that is insect resistant or chemically resistant to different chemicals.
I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of audiences about GMOs, and I stress that when I first began talking about that, I use the term enhanced. I talk about genetically enhanced corn or genetically enhanced soybeans, because that's really what we've done. We've taken what happens in nature. Nature's been evolving forever, and we always have grains that have been changing naturally. And all we've done through genetic enhancement or through genetic modification is speed up the process and maybe encourage the process to go into a specific direction. We wouldn't have herbicide resistance without genetic modification. We wouldn't have corn borer resistance or rootworm resistance without that. For me as a farmer, it goes back to my bottom line. Because of the herbicide resistance, because of the insect resistance, the corn borer resistance primarily is a trait we need, it allows me to have protection to that, to those insects that I would only get through chemical sprays, which is very, very costly. So I can bring that resistance in with the seed, and I don't have to worry about ever having to spray for corn borer. And that's huge to me. It helps. It's much less expensive using that biotech trait. It's much better for the environment because I'm not having to spray toxic chemicals on the top of my corn. Over 90% of the corn used in the United States is genetically modified. So yeah, over 90% of the corn hybrids sold are genetically modified. Some are not, and that's for a very small niche market that's being used. So that's percentages that's modified of corn. Soybeans are very similar, I believe.
Basically what they've done is they've taken a characteristic or a gene that the corn plant that they want to insert into the corn plant. So they go into the DNA of the corn plant, which they have mapped out, and they insert that gene cleanly into a certain spot on that plant. So it's a lot different today than what it was. I mean, when we first started, they were basically taking germplasm, they were taking birdshot type, and they were blasting it into the endosperm of the corn or the soybean or whatever plant that was. And it was kind of a dirty, messy way, and they had markers, and that's where they would, once that plant expressed that marker, they would say this carried the trait that we're looking for. Today it's much cleaner, right? They're taking the exact trait that they want, placing it onto the DNA chain right where they want it into the DNA of the corn plant, and that way it's much cleaner and more effective in the breeding.
It involves manipulating the genetic structure of that corn seeds so that you actually insert a trait that you're looking for. They've found through the DNA strands, they found the link that controls, say, insect resistance in corn. So they're able to insert a genetic trait from another plant that's resistant to that insect that you want control of into the DNA strand of corn to allow the corn then to naturally have that resistance. So it's a very natural process. We're just manipulating how it happens a little bit. It's not like we're inserting anything weird into corn. We're just taking something that naturally occurs in another plant and inserting it into corn to allow that corn plant to have resistance. And again, we don't have to spray with chemicals, so that's the advantage. It's much, much safer.
Are there government agencies overseeing GMO crops?
So USDA has their scientists along with the EPA, and so they're constantly, not only do they test it themselves, but you also have the submission from the company who's producing it as well.
The seed companies do the initial testing, and they develop all that in their labs. They grow it out in initially a few plants in a greenhouse, then they'll have small plots. Then as they begin to bring those hybrids out and look at producing them in larger quantities, they'll test them on many farms throughout the U.S. to investigate whether that crop's actually going to yield properly like they think and how it's going to perform in the real world environment. There's reports that the seed companies have to turn in to the EPA and various government agencies to monitor the safety of those. They're always watching to ensure that that crop will be safe, that will perform properly, that there's absolutely no harmful effects to the environment or to the consumer in any way or shape or form. Nothing has been more widely watched and monitored than genetically modified crops. I've been selling for Pioneer for well over 30 years, and we've had the opportunity as sales reps to have various plots on our farm, or we also look at finding a farmer that is willing to spend the time to plant a plot and allow us to monitor the yields and watch those crops as they develop. So it's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time.
Do other countries use GMOs?
Once the crop is approved by the government that's safe for us to plant, the next step is to get that approval process to happen overseas so that the entities that will be importing our corn are okay with bringing that in. China has a ban on GMO corn. They won't allow any genetically modified corn into their country. And they look at, many countries look at each GMO event as a standalone event. And so they look at it, they decide if it's safe, then they say, yes, we'll allow that to come into our country. So it's very important to have approval overseas before we start producing that crop here, because we don't ever want to raise something that's not okay to export, that we don't have a market for. Japan tends to approve GMO traits very quickly. Some countries take a year or two. In China's case, they haven't approved anything. And one of the reasons we were there is to visit with their farmers about the advantages of biotechnology, because we believe if the Chinese farmers start requesting that trait, saying we need that, it will make us more money, then the government has no choice but to allow GMO imports, because they'll approve it for production right in China. So China's it's a very unique market. They do things their own way, and you just never know what they're going to do. They could change their minds in a heartbeat and open up and say GMOs are good. Who knows? Because it's all government controlled there.
Everything that when it comes to GMOs is always has to be approved by not only our government, but the governments across the world, and which is a big hang up in the things that we're seeing today. Obviously, there's the 2013 piece where Syngenta had Viptera corn that was found and stuff that was exported to China that didn't meet their approval. So we've seen the ramifications of that based on the fact that it's completely political, has nothing to do with with science or factual-based information, but it's a completely political thing that's happening. The same trait is being produced in South America, can be shipped to China, can be done from the United States. It's completely political.
We need markets, and the more markets we have for our corn, for our soybeans, the more profit we make. So the more countries that open up to what we're raising, the better it'll be for all of us, and the cheaper the food will be for the U.S. consumer, because the more markets we have, the better opportunity to have lower cost food. So it benefits everyone.
What would be your response to the consumer who is concerned about their food?
I'm a grandfather, and there's no one on earth I love more than my 2 grandchildren. If I had any reason to think GMO grain was not safe, would I ever allow them to eat the corn that we raise in our fields? Absolutely not. Even though it's not sweet corn, we still eat the corn fresh. I've eaten it all my life. My daughters have eaten it. My grandchildren eat it. We love it. I would never ever allow them to consume that if I had any inkling that it would be dangerous. And it's never ever been proven to be dangerous.
You could get into the debate about what a GMO really is. You could say that wheat technically is a GMO. It's 2 different grass species that were man-made to make wheat as we know it today to make bread. So corn, in a sense, is always genetically modified. So there can be the debate of genetically modified versus genetically engineered, how you want to look at it. But GMO is it's an unsettling term for a lot of people. I think the misinformation about GMOs is what most people need to really study for themselves, so to speak. There's a lot of misinformation out there about GMOs, and but to know that GMOs are there to make a better product, to make a better environment, cleaner, safer, healthier foods. And I think the way that I always view it, from a producer standpoint of view, we have children as well, and if it wasn't safe for our families and our children, we wouldn't feed it to them. And we're feeding the exact same stuff, the same food sources that the average consumer is. And if I didn't feel it was safe for my children, I wouldn't give it to them. So I think the misconception around GMOs is a big one.
When it comes to GMOs, why is there tension?
There's a lot of information that's been put out in the media. Of course, the media has changed the world in the way we know it. Everybody knows that. So anybody can say anything, put it on social media, and broadcast it. And then because somebody said it, it becomes gospel, so to speak. And it doesn't have to be factual. And I think that's a lot of the trouble with the American consumer in general, is we have so much information thrown at us, and being able to sort through what's credible and factual and what's not is hard. A lot of times. So much of it's politically driven, and like I said, a lot of it's not factually based. So the misconception about GMOs, the fact that people are engineering or genetically modifying, whether it happens in animals as well, is very uneasy with some people, and so they'll spout anything to put fear. So it's fear that drives most people, and when we can scare people about what it is they're consuming and create a bit of doubt, then we start to question it. And so when we see that with GMOs, is it safe? Is it healthy? I mean, it kills insects. Is it healthy for my body? That becomes a real question. And you have to look back to science. And when you have over at 100 of the most acclaimed scientists in the world, 88% of those scientists say that it's safe. Now, there's 11% that question it. That leaves you, 1% left that says it's not. I mean, to say that it's science-based and it's healthy, you just let the numbers speak for themselves.
I think there's a group of people that are against a lot of stuff, and they tend to always look for the negative. And they tend to believe the wild stories that they hear, the rumors that they hear, without really doing the scientific research and without believing the scientific research that's already been done. I mean, there's nothing in the history of the U.S. that's ever been tested as much as GMO grain. And I have yet to see a scientific study that proves it's dangerous in any way.
We hope today's program has given you some insight into GMOs so you can better understand why they're utilized in crops. That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. Remember, you can see every program of this series by going to smokyhillstv.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.